Hey everyone, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. It is Monday, October 31st, Halloween. Thank you guys for making us a part of your day. On today's show, is Big 12 expansion what is next for the conference following their television contract? How does that work? Some more questions to answer about the TV contract, and also a look back at the weekend that was. 4 games in the Big 12 to look at coming up after we discuss some television stuff because it's just so important. We didn't get to all of it yesterday.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast, supporting Iowa State today because they need it. They're down bad. Thank you guys for watching the show. Please subscribe to the channel. A whole lot of you have subscribed here in the last couple days, and we appreciate you guys doing that. Please hit that subscribe button, tap that bell for notifications. 6 days a week of Big 12 content. We discuss things like television contracts, Big 12 expansion. Also, we look at individual games, break down games, preview games, make picks, bets, all that kind of stuff on these programs as well. 6 days a week, Sunday through Friday, we've got your Big 12 fix. Make sure you follow us on Twitter too, at LO Big 12. You guys can find me at Josh Neighbors _. All right, so on this show today, really going to kind of focus on that television contract once again. And a lot of you all had great questions in the comment section about the television contract and kind of where we go from here, right? What is next for the Big 12, following that television contract? And I think the first thing a lot of people thought about was expansion. And I think that's kind of the automatic place to go because it's been such a conversation piece. Remember, this entire thing, obviously the Big 12 had to get a new television contract, but this entire situation was kicked off when Oklahoma and Texas declared to leave for the SEC. That caused the Big 12 to go and grab the new 4 schools, and that caused a lot of the conversations about, Bob Bowlesby's fitness as the Big 12 commissioner. Was it time for a change? It prompted that change. It prompted Brett Yormark. The Pac-12, needing a television deal, losing UCLA and USC, prompted their early trigger. Then that prompted the Big 12 to do their early trigger. We ended up with a television contract that we saw yesterday coming out, the tune of 6 years, $2.28 billion, $380 million a year for the Big 12. And that's kind of where we're sitting now. And then you think, okay, what is next? Well, the thing is, the Big 12 wanted to get aggressive, and a lot of you all had ideas about how they could get aggressive and what schools they should go after. And we have to think about it. There's a couple factors here. There's a lot of factors, obviously, but the main thing is this. Number one, it's the Pac-12's move now. All right. If we're talking about the Big 12 and the most likely course for expansion, it would be them grabbing Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, because we know from reporting from Brett McMurphy and other places, Dennis Dodd, that there is interest from the Big 12 in those 4 Pac-12 schools. All right. That does not mean that other expansion could not happen. This is the most likely expansion, it feels like. Well, to pull those schools away from the Pac-12, there would need to be a television gap. And I think Michael Scheer does a pretty good job. Michael Scheer has kind of been a Pac-12 pessimist, I would say, but I think he has been more accurate than what we've seen sometimes from John Wilner and John Canzano, who, we have to understand those guys, their live is the Pac-12. All right. They live the Pac-12 every single day. And it's a reminder to us too, guys. I don't want the Pac-12 to be crushed. I haven't liked a lot of the stuff that's being said over there, but think about it like this. The same way there are fans of Kansas State, there are fans of Arizona State. The same way there are people like me who works 5 days a week over at SiriusXM on the Big 12 radio channel, and sometimes twice in a day, and I do the Big 12 podcast 6 days a week. My life is the Big 12. John Wilner's life is the Pac-12, and he's been doing it for longer than I have. And there are fans, just like you are a fan of your fan base as well over there, and they don't want any of this stuff to happen. They did not want to, Washington State fans didn't want to lose USC and UCLA. Oregon State fans didn't want that. Stanford and Cal fans, if those things do exist, like we saw from at least Stanford's attendance last week, they didn't want this to happen. Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, all the same, right? Nobody wanted this. We didn't want Texas and Oklahoma to leave, and they didn't want USC and UCLA to leave either. And so I don't want, our friend Spencer over at Locked On Big 12, I don't want him to lose, his job. I don't want the Pac-12 to be gone. And so, he's lost that and people in the Pac-12 office get fired and don't have jobs. Like, we don't all want that. But this is where we are now, right? This is where we are. And I will say, I think some of the things that have been in the media have, and I'm a media guy and I usually defend the media. Some of those things in the Pac-12 media, I understand their optimism, but Stuart Mandel mentioned $12 million per team as a possible distribution figure. That was never going to come close to being happened. The Big 12 was always going to get more than that. I mean, if you watch the way live rights fees have skyrocketed, there was never a chance it was going to be that low. With some concerns about where it would be, sure, but that low, never. And everybody is all, the people on the Pac-12 side have said, well, it's an advantage now that the Pac-12 has gotten a benchmark from the Big 12. Originally, the story was the advantage they have was the fact they were early. And I agreed with that because we're seeing the desire, the need from these television companies and entertainment companies, not just Fox, ESPN, CBS, and NBC, in live sports, because you look at the ratings for a lot of things across all of television. The things that stay pretty good are like Survivor, The Bachelor, Big Brother, stuff like that does very, very well. The things that have been really taking a hit, are like a lot of television shows, people are watching them later on, right? So you got to calculate a lot of things into the streaming. Sports Center is taken, it's not the staple that it used to be, right? That's why they kind of changed it to Get Up to where it's debate shows. That's what people want to watch now, as opposed to place where you get your highlights, whatever you want to say. The appetites change. The things that hasn't changed for those shows I mentioned and live sports, right? The appetite has not changed for that. And so being first for the Pac-12, offering plenty of live sports, is there available for them? That advantage got taken away. They were not hearing the dollar figures they wanted to hear, so it's persisted, and they're trying to get a streamer involved to get the dollar figure they want. And the Big 12 was able to take advantage. And once again, I cannot stress this enough. A big reason why, in the piece that we saw yesterday from the Sports Business Journal, Michael Smith and I think it's Michael Smith is who it was, and then also John Orand, a big piece of why Fox was in on this and also asked for basketball content as well. Basketball games are going to be on Fox. That's not currently happening with the split, is because of how competitive the Big 12 is. That was specifically mentioned in that article. They said the competition of the Big 12 is what got them there. The Pac-12 does not have that. All right. When they're down, Colorado is down bad. And look, we've had Kansas forever being down bad, so I'm not going to talk about that. But like Stanford has been really bad. Colorado is really bad. Arizona was really bad. Arizona State is really bad. You've got all of these, and I know we talked about those are schools they want to add. They're all bad for like really weird, different, various situations. And look, once again, those schools' value is really right now in kind of the different time slots they can help the Big 12 achieve. That's why I think they're so appealing. Also, they won't be down bad forever. But the Big 12's level of competition, and I think that's a huge credit. Thank God Oklahoma and Texas decided to do it when they did, because look what happened last year. Baylor against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship. What's happening this year? What are we trending towards right now? We are trending towards Kansas State versus TCU in the championship. And this past week, we just had Kansas State play Oklahoma in a really important game for the second spot in the conference behind a team that's not Oklahoma, featuring two teams that weren't Oklahoma or Texas, right? That's the competition. That's what makes this appealing. The fact that we're getting these bangers every single week, and look, Texas threw them in there. Yeah, the Texas-Oklahoma State game was awesome, right? But to the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about, last 4 weeks, we've been talking about ABC had the Oklahoma State TCU. Then we had FS1 last week as the World Series. Once again, Kansas State versus TCU. And then this week, we had Oklahoma State against Kansas State, all on what should have been, and I count TCU versus Kansas State as they did a great number on FS1. They would have done a really good number if they were on Fox. If the championship series was not on there. So that was just unlucky, but they would have been there anyway. It's just a conflict with baseball, whatever. Right. You're seeing these teams perform in big spots. And I didn't even mention last week that ABC had Oklahoma State and Texas, and one half that team, that game, the team that won Oklahoma State, is not Texas or Oklahoma. That competition is really important. And I think that's what helped the Big 12 secure this thing. Compared to the Pac-12, where right now they've got 4 teams that are in the 8 to 12 range, top 25. The problem is 2 of them are leaving, right? USC and UCLA are up there right now, and 2 of those schools are leaving. The 2 schools that are leaving right now are not really in the conversation, right? They're not really pushing for a Big 12 title. It feels like right now they have an outside shot. It's not over yet, but they're not pushing really as it seems right now. And they, Oklahoma got close last year, but did not make it. That competition element is really important. So that is now where we're kind of waiting to see what the number is. And Michael Scheer had this idea, he covers Arizona, that basically we have to figure out what that gap is, right? What is the gap from revenue distribution? And we think that the Big 12 might distribute over $50 million of revenue. That's what Brett McMurphy said. And after we do the third tier rights thing, which I'll get to in a second, and we do the bowl revenue, and we do the NCAA tournament revenue, and we do the college ball playoff revenue, which they all get to, what does it end up coming out to, right? It's probably going to be over $50 million, maybe 60 in the future. Maybe when it's 12-team playoff, it'll be 60. Right now, not looking like 60. I know the 365 Sports had that. It could be the case once we get a bigger college football playoff, but right now it's not going to be 60. All right. So we can't just count our eggs, count our chickens before they've hatched. The Pac-12 has to ask themselves now, what is that gap that they're willing to stomach? Right? Is $10 million too much? Because in a perfect world, they stay in their conference. They get a contract that's obviously even, right? Even to what the Big 12 is making. But can they stomach a $4, $5, $6 million gap? And does the travel aspect of it, like I know George Kliavkoff is talking about UCLA and, UCLA is going to be upset when they go to and not make as much money because the amount that they are traveling. Unless is their travel going to cost them like $60 million a year when they get over $100 million checks? Is it going to be that much of a difference? I have a tough time believing that. Yeah, there will be some expenses there. And in the end, they might not net as much as some of the other schools. They have to travel too. But it's still going to be worthwhile for them in the end for them to go. It's just not feasible. Even John Wilner admitted that last week in his piece. The Mercury News evaluated that claim. It just does not seem that likely that it's true, right? The schools in the Pac-12 want to remain there. In an ideal world, they can stay together and make enough money and maybe add some more schools and they can keep being the Pac-12. But if that gap hits 8, 9, or 10, let's just say the Big 12 distributes 52 and the Pac-12 distributes 42. All right. Is Arizona willing to stomach that? Is that something to them that appeals to them? Does that make a lot of sense for them to do it? Right. That is a big factor in this now. That's the next move. So the Big 12, I don't really know personally, at least somebody can tell me if I'm wrong here. I'm not 100% sure now what the Big 12 can do outside of what Brett Yormark just did to swing things in Arizona, swing things in direction where right now it makes sense to go. They have to hear the figures now. And I know that I'm sure the Pac-12 ADs and the presidents, all those people have heard what's happening now, but they have to get close to, a deal and hear what it might be. And then they have to decide what is the more profitable path forward for them. Maybe it's a short 3-year deal where they decide, all right, we'll go to market again pretty quickly and see if we can get some more. But that doesn't give you too much security. And that doesn't mean the grant of rights is going to be locked up for too long, right? It still gives teams flexibility. We'll see what happens. But that next step in terms of expansion is not really something the Big 12 can do. And so that's where I'm at right now. If you all disagree, that's fine. But just from a money standpoint, and then the conversation with the Big 12 begins at that point in time about whether or not those schools then add value to the league. Because there is a clause, this is something a lot of you all asked, according to Max Olson of The Athletic, there is a clause in the contract where the Big 12, if they added more schools, they would have, it's called a pro rata clause. It's expected to be included in the Big 12 extension. Multiple conference sources said this, which would aid the conference if it pursues additional members. So that means, and the other part I mentioned yesterday, I'll mention this again, just because that means you add schools does not mean that the television partners are going to pay you more money. All right. there is a deal in the Big Ten. There's a contract clause in the Big Ten deal where if they add Notre Dame, it automatically kicks up to be more. If they add other schools, there is what John Oran and Andrew Marchand over at their podcast, obviously Marchand New York Post, Oran Sports Business Journal, what they refer to as a good faith conversation between the television partners and the league about increases. And look, I think normally you'd see an increase, but the question then becomes, is it an increase where, look, we're distributing $31.6 million in television revenues right now. If you add more schools, would they get 31.6? Are we adding value commensurate for each school? Or is it going to bring down the contract? And then the next question is, if it brings it down in the short term, would it be worth bringing them on? Because in 2031, when the next contract comes up, will you get more money? Because now you've got the whole shebang we're offering. Now we're offering a 16-team league that can play in all 4 time slots, noon, 3, 7, and 10 Eastern times. That's what you're offering at that point in time. We're offering that up, and now it increases the value. So would you take a short-term hit maybe for long-term games? That's all got to be decided. But, and I think some of that math needs to be worked out, now. They start thinking about that now. So when those teams come along, they can have that conversation. And I'm sure Brett Yormark is talking with ESPN and Fox about what would happen in that event as well. But that's something to watch too. All right. So it's about what happens, the numbers that the Pac-12 sees. What's the gap look like? What do those ADs and presidents from those schools think they can stomach? Then it's the Big 12's turn to decide, can we add them? Does it make sense short-term, long-term? What's the balance there? We're talking about adding those schools. That's the next steps. About third-tier rights. People asked about this. This morning, I heard from Matt Brown from Extra Points. I was working Big 12 this morning. He said that he was trying to find something about third-tier rights to figure out really what's happening. And it sounds like that this deal right now does not include third-tier rights. What I'm reading here from Max Olson at The Athletic is combining this revenue, the television revenue for the Big 12, with NCAA, college football playoff, bowl payouts, and the school's third-tier rights would help Big 12 members approach $50 million in annual distribution. So he's basically saying here that this does not include third-tier rights, or at least it sounds like right now. He also mentions the school distributed $42.6 million per school from 21 to 22, a sum that did not include third-tier rights. Now, some of you all out there might be saying, Josh, what are third-tier rights? Well, third-tier rights, and now there's a great explanation for this on Reddit. Tier 1 is nationally televised games, ABC, CBS, the games shown close to coast to coast. Tier 2 is like regional games like Fox Sports Southwest, things like that. Tier 3 is basically everything else. So like pay-per-view, internet, the databases that they have. A good example of this is like Sooner Vision that they have on ESPN Plus. And that's also part of it too. I have to mention this for the Pac-12. The Pac-12 has a full network of inventory, like old games, all that kind of stuff, film, whatever, that they could monetize. So that could be a leg up for them. That's something to watch as well. But the third tier rights oftentimes fall upon the schools to distribute as they see fit, and they usually receive fees for this kind of stuff. Now, some of them have thought about, putting it on ESPN Plus, much like Oklahoma did. Some of them, and I think LSU has almost a direct to consumer type situation, right? So it's coaches shows. Maybe it's I would consider the Baylor show that's on ESPN Plus. They did those Baylor basketball, football documentary type deals. That is a third example of a third tier right. At least that is my understanding of what that means, right? So that is something that would be considered a third tier right. And some of the lower sports as well can fall in that category sometimes. It depends on the deal. So that is what we have to watch. The third tier rights to schools still have the option to do it as they wish, which kind of takes me to the next thing. A Big 12 network. Somebody asked in the chat too yesterday, will there be a Big 12 network? Well, I think that's a very interesting question. I'm not 100% sure the answer, but in my opinion, I don't think we see one. just because they're split up between Fox and ESPN, and because there's already an ACC network, there's already an SEC network on the Fox side, or excuse me, on the ESPN side. And to me, it makes more sense if just because it's a 6-year deal. Now, I think the Big 12 will remain with ESPN moving forward for sure, 100% sure. Not 100% sure, but I feel like it's a good bet that these are going to remain together. It feels like in some capacity. That being said, like, what are the benefits to a network? Having that inventory there, it's a place to put some third tier stuff. It's a place to put more games. But because ESPN lost the Big Ten, they do have gaps they have to fill. And they might be losing not losing Pac-12 programming, but we have to see what happens there as well. So I think with that in mind, and also the fact that they've already got ESPN Plus, and they're more than willing to put stuff on ESPN Plus because it does drive subscription. I mean, if you're a Big 12 fan, you've got to have ESPN Plus. It is a must if you're a Big 12 fan. If you're a Big 12 fan, it usually pays for itself. I know they're jacking up the price. If you're a Big 12 and a combat sports fan like I am, then it really is. It's a great deal. If you're a college basketball fan too, they put tons and tons and tons of like lower level college hoops on ESPN Plus as well. So I have to say I do love my ESPN Plus. And especially them being split up too, I don't see them having a Big 12 network at the moment. I could be, once again, all this stuff, guys, is just my opinion. I could be wrong. You all can disagree with me. Let me know if you do. But to me at this point in time, with the way things have worked with the ESPN Plus, and I know it sometimes sucks, but like the presentation to me is pretty good. And they put good matchups on there, and I don't mind paying for ESPN Plus, especially because I know it supports the conference in some ways. So I don't think necessarily the right move is to go with a Big 12 network at this moment in time. I don't know if it makes a ton of sense, especially because it feels like there's enough slots when you take off the Big 10 games, all the games they had, and you add in with the inventory that the ESPN's getting with the Big 12. I think they're fine right now with just doing. Plus, it's only a 12-team league too, so I feel like with everything going on, like they have enough right now just to say, all right, let's put it on the big networks: ESPN, ESPN2, ABC, and then ESPN Plus to fortify that. So that's where I'm at with those. If you guys go to our YouTube page right now, you guys can send me some more questions. All right, you guys can send some more questions. And I already put it up in the community tab. Send questions about the contract, about the future of the league. If you have anything you guys want me to answer, I will answer. All right, let's actually move. This is a longer episode today. Let's move in now to some of the conversations about this weekend's games. And we have to start with the Kansas State Wildcats. Oh my God, did Kansas State destroy Oklahoma State? In a game this past weekend that was for the number 2 spot in the Big 12, Kansas State they came to play in every way, shape, and form. They took advantage of all of, whether it be injuries, whether it be young receivers, whether it be a bad pass defense. They really took advantage of all of it from Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State never had a shot, and it started early when Will Howard on that 4th down found Cade Warner. A gutsy play call, a great throw, and a great catch. And that's really the story of this game, is how good Will Howard looked. Will Howard, to me, is a guy that has been maligned, and I think rightfully so. But Will Howard this season looks much different than he did last year. He's just a different player when you watch him. The confidence is there. He's not the runner that Adrian Martinez is at all. But we've had so much talk about, look, Martinez needs to have at least a functional passing game to get this thing rolling. Well, because the two-headed monster in the running game. If you take the passing game for Kansas State and you bump it up like 4 octaves to the way they did the other day, then, you don't need the quarterback to run. You're actually good enough with Deuce Vaughn being that running game. And that's what he was that's what he was for them on Saturday in this game. I know Giddens got 7 carries and he got in the end zone as well, later in the game, a lot of mop-up duty. But Will Howard was the story here. And now it's a question of, all right, what's going to happen? And I think it's something we'll dive into later on in the week. But Kansas State, every time about those injuries, and they had some of them, and guys were banged up, and they still played fantastic. That's why I'm not a fan of the injuries being a big excuse. Oklahoma State had them last week. They won with them against Texas. This week, they had them. They lost with them. I don't think it's much of an excuse because I don't think it matters who was healthy and who wasn't. Kansas State had injuries against TCU, I know, and a lot of Kansas State fans think that's the reason why they lost. Sure, it's probably part of it, but also, too, man, they got curb stomped in that second half, or kind of end of the first half, into the second half run that was happening. All right. I know Will Howard gets hurt in that game, but was he hurt in this game too and still looked this good? So the injury, I think everybody is just kind of crying over spilled milk with the injuries because everybody now at this point in time is banged up. To me, it doesn't matter. Kansas State went out there and shut them out. It's one of the worst losses in history for a top 10 team. It's one of the worst losses Mike Gundy has ever taken, probably the worst in terms of score in a Big 12 game. And they just pillar to post were the better team. And for a school that we've talked so much about Kansas State, like they've got a chance this year. When you have quarterback play like that, and once again, I don't know if it holds up because that's a really bad passing defense. And there were some ducks in the TCU game. Will Howard is throwing lasers here. I thought a lot of his throws were really good. There were still some bad misses. There was one on a bad miscommunication. We just threw it in the first half and it landed away from folks that could have been picked off at certain times. And that's going to come with a guy like this. But when that step up in competition comes, and it is coming for them, what happens to them? What happens to their offense? They've got a tough road to close it out here. Texas, at Baylor, at West Virginia, KU. Could be tougher, but still, there are some difficult games in that stretch. So with this, I'm saying excellent win. This was the full potential at all three levels for them. They rushed like 3 or 4 guys all game and were able to get a lot of pressure, which I thought was pretty impressive as well. And they made Spencer Sanders look uncomfortable. And Will Howard was the man in this game. So was Deuce is always the man. But that throw that Howard had to Deuce, my God, a rocket near the goal line that he put right on his hands. That was amazing. So TCU or Kansas State rather takes the number 2 spot in the Big 12. TCU escapes Morgantown. So there was a lot of questionable coaching, I think, on both sides. I was not impressed with TCU's short yardage offense. Thought there were some situations later in this game where they could have picked up first downs and not given the ball back, and didn't think the play calling was that good. That being said, they scored 41 points. If you have not watched the new Batman, you can watch it. It's awesome. There's a scene where Paul Dano, who is the Riddler, is just watching bombs go off outside of a jail cell, and it's just like boom, boom, boom. That is what watching the TCU offense is like. I mean, they had 4 touchdowns of 50-plus yards. There was a 51-yard Kendre Miller touchdown run. There was Bailey had one too in the backfield. He had a 30-yard run as well. Tay Barber, 71 yards. Savion Williams had the bomb in the end, 57 yards. Quentin Johnston, 55 yards. These guys hit big play after big play after big play after big play, and you can't cover all of them. And that nuke at the end to cover the spread was something that was pretty special and made the scoreline look different. But TCU, we thought this would be a tough game for them, going on the road after having to get up week after week after week after week with all these difficult games they had, and they go on the road to a team that's a wounded animal and kind of a sleepy start. And that was a fist fight. Now, they didn't start as slow as they typically do. They're able to even it up and start going back and forth a little bit. But I thought for them, those explosive plays just continue to be the difference. And also their defense really does step up in the second half. They only allowed 10 points second half, which I know is like still not, it's not like amazing, 31 of the game. But their second half defense, if you look back at the last few games that they've played, it's really emerged as an X factor for them. It's what allowed their offense to get back in it. Against Kansas State, you go back and look, and they shut them out in the second half of that game. Then you go back to the Oklahoma State game and look at what they did in the second half in that contest, and they allowed 6 points in the third quarter. Now, I know they did 10 in overtime, end up getting the 2 overtimes, end up getting the win, but still in regulation we're talking about here. That defense has really become an effective weapon for them in the second half of games. It's become much better. It's still not a great defense, but they can make some plays. They hit hard. They've got athletes. And so despite all the transfers that they've had really good injury luck. They've stayed very healthy, which is important. Any good team, you all know this, any good team is going to have some luck. And they've continued on that path. This was just another game where, CJ Donaldson looked pretty good. and JT Daniels did at times, but they just didn't have the firepower. And watching this game, seeing them start to trade blows, you knew how it was going to end. You knew it was going to end with TCU winning, because they are just a more explosive, better offense. That's just how it's going to work. You can't go shot for shot with them on these high scoring games. They're going to win. The one thing I will say, though, to go back to what I started with, is that TCU really does need to clean up some of that stuff in the intermediate game. I mean, they felt like they could have iced the game a couple times, and they passed. They should have run. They run where they should have passed. They weren't getting late first downs, it felt like, and they were giving the ball back in the end. Especially on that drive. What was it? The bad interception that we had, that one too. But they just weren't finishing the game off, it felt like, in a way that they should have. And then the punt by Neil Brown was not great. But TCU, man, like, they continue to just win games. And I know it's not always blowout, massive wins, Alabama style, but they're racking them up. You keep stacking these opponents up. They keep knocking them down. And now we're in a spot where they're 8-0. They're 5-0 in the league. And really, they're one win away from being one win away to ice it. I mean, it feels like that game November 12th on the road against Texas, TCU is going to have a chance against their old coach, Gary Patterson, to lock up a spot in the Big 12 title game, I feel like, at that point in time. They could probably lose the last two games and be fine. I mean, if you look at the standings at this point in time with where everybody is in the conference, you have to think that, with the tiebreaker situation, they've got one over Kansas State. They've got one over Oklahoma State. They've got one over OU. They've got one over Kansas. And they're now in the spot where, the only teams with 2 losses that could catch them are the Longhorns and Baylor, and they'd have to beat them. They have to beat them. So basically, they win next week. They beat Tech, and they move to 6-0 in the league. That game against Texas is functionally for a spot in the Big 12 championship. Somewhat becomes a spot for them in the Big 12 championship game. There is still an outside shot. They could lose to Baylor and then lose their the last game of the season for them is Iowa State. That could still happen, and a tiebreak with Baylor, I guess, could force them out. But I don't really know if we should be banking on that with the way that the Cyclones have looked this year. Turnover party in Lubbock. Man, oh man. They control this. This was the game that Baylor has been wanting to play all season. They went into a hostile environment that people said wasn't a hostile. It was. And it felt like Texas Tech was a team that had much more on the line than Baylor, and Baylor has not looked great, but they're now back to their winning ways, 2-game winning streak. It's funny. Blake Shapen was brought there to kind of take the offense to the next level. This was a game where it felt like Shapen played more like Spencer Sanders did last season, right? When they asked Spencer to take care of leads, take care of games, preserve, be the quarterback, make the throws when you have to. 19 for 30 for 211 and a touchdown. And he also ran for 30 yards as well. But this was a game where they gave Richard Reese 36 carries for 148. They rode him, and they rode him really to a advantage where they took care of the football. I mean, they had 40 minutes and 17 seconds of possession because they forced so many turnovers. They kept running the ball, and they put so much pressure on Tech's offense. Tech's offense, I felt like they had to score every single possession in the second half. And you had Morton throwing picks. He looked really uncomfortable in this game. Baylor's front did a great job getting pressure. He was running the side all the time. And as much as he tries to fling it sometimes, like Patrick Mahomes, he could not do it like Patrick Mahomes on a night where they honored Patrick Mahomes. So great job from Baylor forcing turnovers. They're back on track, and their Big 12 title hopes are still very much alive. The rest of the way for them, though, Kansas State, TCU, and Texas. The opportunities are there to rack up those wins that could put them in a Big 12 title, conversation. They're all there, but they're probably going to have to run the table the rest of the way. And so it starts in 2 weeks. They have the bye now, and they get Kansas State. So it's nice for them to rest up, get Reese ready to roll, who is an absolute stud, man. Absolute stud that Richard Reese is. And no Monterey ball, and they're able to get the job done in this game. Oklahoma continues Iowa State's misery. Hunter Deckers is just throwing some horrendous interceptions out there. That's also a function of their offense just not being very good. they really just don't have many playmakers outside of our guy, Xavier Hutchinson, who had another 10 catches in this game. They try to get the ball to Jalen Knoll, but it just feels like the playmaking is not good enough. And Oklahoma, credit them, their run defense had been horrible, but it was excellent in this game. Eric Gray goes for over 100 yards. Dylan Gabriel on a day he wasn't very good, helps them get the job done. And then obviously that early special teams touchdown, that's an area where Iowa State struggled. Now, I'm not really sure if they're going to stop that, but that was a great play call from Brent Venables. They took advantage. That's what good teams do. And Oklahoma, not sure if they're a good team yet, but they're showing, in that situation, they're showing what good teams should do. I picked them on the show. Guys, make sure you follow me on Twitter because I change my mind on Saturday all the time about some of these close games. And on Saturday morning, I woke up and I'm like, would I bet on Iowa State today? Hell no. And I was like, it's Oklahoma going there. This is, this team got a win last week and they looked much better. And Iowa State's offense, I just don't trust at all. So I'm not gonna go with them. And I ended up actually going pretty big on Oklahoma. And it paid off. And this Iowa State team, I mean, they play West Virginia this week. They're favored. This is their chance. This is their chance to get that Big 12 win that's escaped them so far. All right, that will do it for today's show. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at LOBig12. You guys can find me at @JoshNeighbors_. Find the show wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. Till next time, my friends, as always, stay safe.